So my name's Mark Leslie Lefebvre. I write under the name Mark Leslie for obvious reasons. What I'm going to try and do in a little talk is I'm going to go over how we came from this to this. But first I'm going to set the scene, and I'm going to explain how this can be just as interactive and just as engaging as this. But first, there's me. I also want to talk about how reading on devices like this can be fun, rewarding, and exciting as reading on devices like this. See Rob Sawyer's book there in the middle? I'm also going to have a very favorable and heavy bias towards a company that you might have heard of, born in Toronto here, called Kobo. But first, show of hands. I often define myself as a bookseller, a writer, a book nerd. How many of you? Okay. Reader, oral storyteller, listener, viewer, researcher. Keep your hands up, because you're all doing this, right? Editor, publisher, yes. Printer, print on demand. PR contact, you often do that as well for your work. Marketing, you're an accountant, especially this time of year at tax time. You're a designer, an artist, librarian, IT support. Oh, that's from a movie. Never mind. It's not Best Boy. I started telling stories when I was little. I'd make up stories using little figures like this. And I got older, I used figures like this. And then I would use my imagination later on to put myself in the story with the little figures. There's me getting beat up by Farmer Jones, and he's chasing me with a tractor. I ended up writing horror stories when I got older. I also started drawing cartoons when I was little. That was a creative output for me. I loved getting stories out there. And one of the different things between playing with toys and putting stories on paper was that they stuck. We heard this morning about talking about etching in stone. This was my little version of etching in stone. But that wasn't enough. Soon I got a little bit older and I got to love words. So the cartoons just didn't cut it for me because I just kept putting more and more and more words there. So that just wasn't enough. I evolved into a love for writing stories in prose. And I wrote really, really long stories, much to the chagrin of my poor teachers. When you had an assignment to do a one-page, I ended up turning them into epics. And somehow they just moved me through just to get rid of me because I was wasting trees. I was very excited to discover my mom's Underwood typewriter when I was young. Pecking away at it, I spent my summers writing. There's me as a little boy, not getting any sun. I was writing a very terrible Conan the Barbarian fantasy novel that will never come out of the trunk. And there's the Dungeons and Dragons book I was using for research. That was my first bit of research as a writer. I moved on to the VIC-20, the friendly computer. And then I went on to the Commodore 64, but I will never forget my very first word processor was called Paperback Writer for the Commodore 64. Not that paperback writer, but I did listen to a lot of Beatles when I was younger, and I found that inspiring. I was writing at a time when you would actually type up manuscripts and mail them. You'd send them away. You would wait very, very patiently to hear back from the editor or publisher. And then when you got your rejection, you would, hang your head in despair and then send it out again. Fortunately now, as a writer, there's a reject button right on the keyboard of the editors I send stuff to, so bam. I can send out like 20 times as many stories to get rejected as I used to. So, we've just looked, there's a very serious writer you're looking at. This is my own personal way. I wanted to tell you the 360, because I'm going to go back and forth between writer, bookseller, and what this means, the industry. I just wanted you to know I'm very serious, despite the fact that there's some funny slides here. It did start with oral storytelling. The storyteller could see the audience's reaction and adjust the story accordingly. That was really, really key. Then we moved on to scrolls, and this is just publishing in 30 seconds. And from scrolls, we went to Gutenberg and the printing press. And that basically allowed more people to get access to stories, which was good for writers, because the more people that were reading stories, the more there was a need for us. And then Cynthia talked about the invention of the mass market or the paperback. That allowed reading to be in more and more hands than ever before, which again is really, really good for writers. There was also this mystique, even though they were more popular than ever before, of the romantic writer, the Hemingway with a drink in hand and a typewriter, black tie affair, wonderful celebration of fantastic authors. But you have to remember, we still have paperbacks, and not all paperbacks were high literary prestige, but again, this was filling a need, and Nympho Librarian was a popular book for some people. That kind of ensured that hardcovers would always have a role in literature. Then we move on to the digital age, and online, being able to order your books online and do things like that allowed more people to read. And then you moved into, of course, to eBooks, where there's physical books and digital books, and really eBooks are just another kind of mass market paperback when you think about it. It's just another form. But I think that now that we have the technology in front of us, this is important for writers. Writers can take advantage of the technology, as we saw from what Cynthia was presenting, to tell stories in fascinating ways. There's ways they can engage and get the story to come right off the pages and interact with them. Digital. Digital limits are imposed. Limits imposed by the physical can dissolve. 300-page book, it has to be so many words, things like that. I just finished editing the Tesseract's anthology for Edge Publishing, 90,000 word limit. I had to pick between 22 and 26 stories and poems. I had over 40 poems that I thought were amazing and I wanted to use, but I had to go back and reject some really, really good things, so that was a limit. The concept in digital of a short story and a novelette, novella can also devolve because you're not restricted by physical binding and distribution and things like that. Karen in the audience here, who I published in a previous anthology, was telling me that she had a story she wanted to submit to Tesseracts, but the word limit for each story was 6,000 words, and this ended up being a novel or a novella or a novelette. She wasn't sure, but the beautiful thing in this world is there could be a home for Karen's story, and it doesn't have to fit into this very restrictive guideline. So there are new possibilities for authors, particularly when it doesn't fit. Transmedia. When I think of transmedia, I think of being able to tell a story across various platforms, whether or not they're a single cohesive unit. And Star Wars is one of the best examples of that. When you think about the toys and games, the DVDs, it started off with a single movie, became a trilogy, became the prequel, then there was the animated one. With all kinds of stuff in between. There were comic books. There was video games where you can actually play some of the roles. And Knights of the Old Republic is a complete new environment spun off of that. Books, novels. I remember Rob calling them Big Macs for the mind at one point in time. They're good. You know exactly what you can get every time you get it. And they sell really, really well, and they help the publishing industry as well. Lego, my son, 7 years old, big time in the Lego Star Wars and the figurines and stuff like that. So when you think about Star Wars, don't just think about George Lucas and Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, but think about all of the different ways that that story can be shared and told and experienced. My son is creating Star Wars stories in our basement using Lego figurines, as well as watching the new Clone Wars animated series on TV. Calgary author Jeff Buick. Multi-dimensional storytelling. If you went to Google One Child, this was a book, it was also an ebook, but he also did something very similar to what Cynthia was showing us, is not only did he have the, oh, hey, look, you got to check out a bookseller, I skipped ahead. So let's just focus on Shelley for a second. You can order One Child through Blue Heron Books here, so it'd be a good idea to check it out at your local bookseller. I put my CBA hat back on. But what Jeff Buick had done with One Child was it was not just a novel, but you could also subscribe and get feeds. So as the story was unfolding in real live time, you could actually hear radio broadcasts referring to things going on in Afghanistan. There were video clips of supposed reporters that were in the story that were there with real live actors, and it was a really engaging experience. I had the pleasure of seeing Jeff do a reading last summer from One Child, and the reading was him reading, then it cut to video, then him reading, then you heard the radio. You saw the video of the radio. It was amazing. Oh, the reason I brought Shelley up here is because she's got some amazing books, and you should all go buy at least one book from her. Booksellers as well. You can't forget that even though we're in a technological society, something very, very critical to writers is having a place to go, having a place for your readers to go and congregate and meet you, right? The best place to meet a writer? In a bookstore. This allows that interactivity to really, really happen between authors and writers, and that's why I believe that there will always be bookstores. There will always be awesome bookstores like Blue Heron Books. Twitter. You guys probably know the classic Hemingway short story, For Sale, Baby Shoes Never Worn. 6 words tells an amazing story. Twitter is a way for writers to communicate and tell stories. I actually made the most money per word. I sold 3 Twitter stories. They were $1 each. That was the most money I ever made per word for a story. It was amazing. But it was really, really hard. I'd rather write a short story or a novel. GPS and location-based. Things like Foursquare. So when I got here, I checked in. You can check in, and it was actually Ashley from when she was with, Ashley Gardner was with Dundurn Press, and she was talking about how she had gone into places, and if that was a book from Dundurn Press that mentioned a particular location in Toronto, she would go in and leave a tip, which was an excerpt from the book, and I went, oh, that is awesome. Could you imagine telling a mystery story where you have to go throughout the city and pick up clues and things like that? Absolutely blows my mind. I can't wait to do something with it. One that I'm really involved in right now is an app called Zombies Run. I like to listen to books when I go for a run, but this is more fun than just listening to a novel. It's a GPS-enabled application that actually tracks the speed you run at, and you're actually listening to a narrative. You become runner number 5, and they're talking in your ear, and they're sending you out on missions to collect supplies. And there's random zombie attacks. So you're listening to these people telling you, okay, you got to go here and collect the supply, and as you're running, because it tracks, you pick up things and you bring them back to the base, and it helps build. So that it's very much like a video game when you get back home and you're exhausted, and you can add things to your village and slowly build up the population. But then the random zombie attacks come, and I'm running at a pretty good pace. When the random zombie attacks come, you have to run 20% faster than you were normally running. So there I am going down the street in my neighborhood, lights usually pates, and the people walking by, and I go, oh shit! And they have no idea what's going on, because there's zombies, and you can actually hear them behind you. Anyone who's a runner, if you need motivation to run, this is my motivation to run. Not just to get away from the zombies, but there's characters. There's a conflict going on between people who are talking to you, the 2 different people in the radio control tower. When you finish, it's typically a 30-minute run. When you finish that, it actually kicks over to radio mode, and you're listening to these 2 guys who don't get along, who are stuck in a post-apocalyptic radio station trying to amuse you using your own playlist. So between songs, this is absolutely fascinating. I want to pitch a novelization to them for this. Rob will probably write it, but... Julie Wilson, talking about meta. Julie Wilson started a blog called Scene Reading, in which she wanted to celebrate. She would go on the subway or somewhere in public. She would find someone reading. She would report about it on her blog. Then she would write a little description about who they were and what they were reading and what page number they were on. It was very, very exciting. There was a movement of followers who wanted to contribute. Oh, Julie, I saw someone reading in public. Isn't that good for authors, seeing people read in public? Tweets and hashtags were going out, hashtag Scene Reading. And she got a book deal. So it was an ebook. It was also one of the most gorgeous books that I've seen in the last few months that I'm sure Shelley has copies of and you can buy from Blue Heron Books. Fiction in the book, I wasn't expecting this. Fiction, flash fiction that Julie wrote, inspired by the people that she saw. She made up a story as to who they were and what they were about. Absolutely amazing book. I sincerely hope everyone buys a copy and takes a picture of themselves with it, because I have a Pinterest board called Scene Holding Scene Reading, very meta. Pictures of people and booksellers holding Julie's book, and people are contributing, and it's just a lot of fun. People with books is amazing. It's good for writers. It's good for booksellers. As a writer, in 2006, I rolled out a story in blog format. It was a novella. I decided to just roll it out. It's told from the point of view of a 17-year-old who thinks he has a death curse. So he starts blogging in his morose way, and, oh, woe is me, I'm a teenager, and my girlfriend broke up with me, and people are dying, blah, 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 blah. People actually latched onto it, thought it was real. I had to contact them and say, no, actually, it's not real. He's not suicidal. This is fiction, and put up disclaimers and that. But then what happened is people were starting to engage with Peter, who is the main character of the story. Peter would react to things that they commented. And so over a 9-month period, I actually incorporated comments from people into the story. At a particular point in time, I had a character named Robbie who was a teacher of his, who was a mentor, and I knew, I communicated, I broke the fourth wall, and I said, Robbie's gonna die, okay? Spoiler alert, he's gonna die. I need to know from you guys, should he be a hero or should he be a villain? Does he die as a good guy or a bad guy? And they voted. And that's how the story went. And it was an amazing experience for me as a writer. It was almost equivalent to the ad-lib stuff that you do on stage, but of course I had to incorporate it into the story. That's actually sold to a small publisher in Canada. It's actually coming out in a novel form, so you can find out what happens after that. Right now you can read the whole thing online, or at least the first third of the novel online in blog format. It's actually rolling out in 2012 again. Matches nicely with 2006. And you can actually see what's going on with Peter O'Malley. And then when you're done that, hopefully you buy lots of copies of the book, and you go order it from Shelley's store. I'd also held some contests to kill people off. So Peter O'Malley kills people. So I took a page from George Lucas's script, and in between scenes, I can write a little scene specifically killing you. So I'd raised some money for Hamilton Literacy Council back in 2006, where people volunteered to be killed in the story. I'd learn about them and what are you afraid of and what's your favorite color, and I would incorporate that into a story. And it was a lot of fun for them and a lot of fun for the Literacy Council that actually got some money out of it. eBooks are an immersive experience. They're about getting lost in the book. There's a study that shows the Pew study, and it's not a stinky study, but it's pewinternet.org. 88% of those who read an ebook also read a printed book, which is really heartwarming for booksellers, isn't it? But beyond the general nature of ebooks, this is where I go back into Kobo mode, is already exploring ways in which the e-reading experience connect you to other readers and the author. Kobo Reading Life, if you haven't heard about it, is a social. It's about the gamification of getting badges for reading at midnight, or sometimes if you're reading when you're supposed to be working, or during the commuting time and things like that, which is a lot of fun. I just try and read at different times of day or different speeds just to get different badges. And it's really, really fun. You can post it and share it to Facebook and Twitter and things like that. And what's really, really neat is you can make comments and take excerpts and post them and say, I just finished reading Triggers by Rob Sawyer. And in it is like, oh, this is a really, really great scene. I have to make a comment about that. And some of my friends can comment and say, oh, that's good. Maybe I'll go buy that book, which is good for booksellers and writers. Reading stats, I love to see how I'm doing, how many words you've read, different times of day that you read. It's just a lot of fun. And then with the Kobo Vox, it takes it to a whole new level where you can actually see who else of your friends through Facebook are actually reading at the same time. You can start to engage in conversations in the book, which is kind of neat. So you can see there's a little comment bubble there. People are leaving comments inside the book, so they're actually having a book club discussion dialogue within the book, even though they're not physically in the same place. Then you can post that to Facebook, and there it is on the Facebook wall where you can actually see the commentary. But it gets better. Here's where you, the author, come in. Kobo author notes. You can get identified as an author within the book. So Gina Showalter, I just done this recently, and Jojo Moynes, who's a UK writer, just done it recently, where she's identified as the author. So it's not just somebody leaving a comment in the book, it's the author leaving a comment in the book. A little logo and an icon with a quill. And this is kind of like the director's notes. This is kind of like, I would love this because I love listening to Rob talk about his books, but I'd love to open up one of his novels and go, this is Rob telling that really cool thing that he tells when he talks about touring through a hospital in, I'm not going to give it away, but he talks about touring through a hospital for research for his novel. That's fascinating stuff, which I always love to engage with as a reader. But that's available in Kobo. But again, not everybody wants to share their reading activity on Facebook and Twitter, so you don't have to, so you can turn it off, so you can go ahead and read books like this, and nobody's going to know that that's what you were reading. So your guilty reading pleasures are safe. So that is how I tried to tie in the fact that oral storytelling can come full circle, 360, involved with ebooks and e-reading, and still allow for that connectivity between readers and for writers.